Karakia, tā tai tuarangi Māori, whenua Māori, tinana, manawa, henengaro, wairua Māori, ki te katoa, mauri ora Māori, aho, Māori, tūturu o whiti whakamaua kia tīna, tīna, haumi e, hui e, tāiki e. Welcome to the Currency of Healing, Episode 5 in the podcast Clearing Trauma from Discrimination. My name is Siana Raymond, and as the colonised child espouses that the currency of healing lingers on the balance of profusity of the living organism whilst it is truly dying, and dying as the colonised child is a decision none of us had a choice or voice in the making of or choosing of. I can't heal the colonised child from indigenuity. I heal the colonised child from the mistaken identity. Pause here for a reminder from my previous episodes. Your identity is the power that capitalism wants to own. Of the 1963 classification that I am a Māori, when I in fact don't even know and will not know throughout all of my informative and important years of my life, the traditions, the language, and most of all, my whakapapa in pepeha. To be fair, no one at the level I lived at, that's children, knew we were being colonised. I mean, who'd have thunk that one up on their own? Most of us are mindless about social dignities. These things were being done at far loftier levels. Anyway, the brain is elastic and malleable, easy to mould at a very young age. But the crisis I fall from is more that our society was ignorant of the covenants made with religious orders. Our white New Zealand European peers didn't know the damage was being done from both the inside and out to all of us. We were growing white European New Zealand racists and racism in our very own backyards. No fear. So how far can I stretch the currency of healing trauma from this kind of discrimination? It's the same answer as the distance I can get healing from the negative mind-altering effects of colonisation, only realised after it was done and dusted. As I mingled with Māori who had either decolonised sooner than me or raised within the warmth of Māori traditions, language and culture, I faced suspicions due to my very white New Zealand European ways and ignorance of my heritage. All of that is true. But mostly I was ignorant of the effects of colonisation and how I could easily hurt Māori with that ignorance. After all, colonisation acts to turn us against anything ethnic. And I could be like that back in the days of potatoes, when I believed there were better ways to be ethnic. And the act of racism I experienced in my early childhood, that continues to affect me now. It is a mind twister that levitates mental illness to a whole other level. In 1990, finding help with therapy as a colonised child is a rat's game of chase the mouldy cheese into the block of shameful, unjust inadequacy. I see the problem as colonisation, and the therapists in 1990 available to treat trauma were all white New Zealand Europeans, with no idea of what modality I could heal in. They kept and still do blaming my parents rather than and instead of the whole ungracious act of colonisation, because whether therapists would like to deny my truth, if I equate the harm done to me, most of it would have been at work and then school, both where I got treated for my race, colour and culture, and not my intelligence or sustainable initiative. How do we really put the owner of this trauma in their rightful place? Well, okay, let's examine this and the chances of getting some currency going. I acknowledge some of us had parents who absolutely enmeshed into the path of destruction, who lost traces of their humanity, who had their paternal and maternal instincts drowned in addiction, crime, and violence. The colonized child isn't on the path of golden clarity. Our path, preordained from first contact, is the slow and irrevocable dissolution of our sanity, according to the amount and influence we can't engage in the traditional Māori path. Forgiveness is individual, and to the colonized child whose parents neglected, hungerfied, abused, and degraded in all manners and forms, and eventually even killed you, to you I give my deepest aroha. In the recess of knowledge, looking back at the historic traditional path and the indigenous child before first contact, it's not modernity, throw off the lens of westernization for the moment. In my search for the truth, to pour light onto the shadow which arises in hiding from the trauma of discrimination, I searched in the effort to discover what my close to ancient tupuna were like, lived, moved in time and space, and had meaning. I found people who were healthy, and for the most part they were slender to slim, well-boned with thick, fine hair. Looking at the Goldie paintings is a mystery resolved. The skin and hands with little to no osteoarthritis, and their features, I noticed, aren't torn like mine through the act of and living through assimilation and westernization. Looking at old black and white Polaroids of great-grandparents and great-grand-aunts and uncles, great kaumatua and queer, there is so much to tell of their lives just by looking into the grace of their skin and richness of colouring. Continuing, there is little evidence to report their poor health included diabetes and heart disease, addiction, negatives of domesticity, suburban neurosis. There is remarkable soul fragment retrieval and healing from this process of investigation. I followed the works of established anthropologists from both Māori and Pākehā ancestry, particularly those who are allies of Māori, rather than the clinical rationed academic. It is a long kaupapa. There is pain. I experienced much emotional pain and grief. This was how I went about not only spending into the currency of healing, but also gaining more currency from that act. I can't know the facts of racial trauma that my great-grandparents and their generation suffered and or emulated after Western ways. One acute noticing came from the dress wear, I suppose, looking at the full-length, high-neck, long-sleeved, fully covered gowns, which were the height of fashion in the 1800s era. Totally allowable, wouldn't we say? Considering we're all going out into Western society, it could have looked and seemed strange to go around in village wear. There is an element of self-reflection in this very eternal human ability to self-reflect is where we overcome the path of destruction and the power it wields over our vulnerable souls. To acknowledge Māori are vulnerable is both vulnerable and soulful. What made our generations and those before us vulnerable in the timeline of colonisation is a misery of external issues that cut into what is and once was essential to all people of the tribe, who follows the sun and the moon, the time to move, when seasons change, deal with conflict, koha and life, death and everything in between. I'm not an academic expert at what the crisis is in the study of the long-term to short-term effects of colonisation on a person, whānau, hapu, and iwi. And though these kōrero are anecdotal from my story, no currency of any healing would stretch to cover that trauma. I've tried it. I couldn't get any of my whānau to sit with me and tell me their colonisation story. This is a very personal kaupapa for them, and to voice the colonised efforts onto their souls and personalities, that is too painful. Instead of a currency for healing, there could be more currency for shame and whakamā. Taking the traditional path, I once had the feelings of not being bothered, that too much water has gone under the bridge, and right now it is time for earning and looking the other way. From my experience of talking to a therapist about this issue, they immediately judged me as we are equal, normal members of our New Zealand society. So the whole dilemma of colonisation would magically disappear. This was back in the very early 90s, when I was in my 30s, ignorant of myself and my place in the grand scheme of things. The stigmas of being Māori in the scope are profound, but nowhere near the understanding I possess of it today in 2023. Me of the 1990s and 2023 are different beasts. Both are extraordinary, but 30s has a distorted voice for my hearing of the me now. I haven't actually engaged a counsellor to talk about racism. I wouldn't know where to start and how, and when I have, my level of healing is mixed. When it's about work, this was the most dominant area in my youth to adult life where I got seriously traumatised over a long period. And in the last 3 years, I can now complete that circle of trauma to fully include health services, providers and retailers. The last, I believe, is because of COVID-19. I simply noticed the change in people's behaviours and sense of self-protection and worth. But I'm repeating myself. Therefore, let me summarise on some of the points I've raised so far. Therapy, neuroscience, health and fitness routines, spirituality. Do these work? It's hard to say, as we are all unique, given though this is about the colonised child and their currency to heal. I'll make some effort towards analysis and results of my own trials and tribulations with these methods. I've attempted neuroscience in the hope it'll change negative thinking patterns and habits to develop positive and constructive thinking. The results were mixed. I chose the popular brands from social media. I won't name them in this episode. But what I believe is pertinent to this attempt is that I saw myself as a regular, everyday person living an everyday, regular life, and I didn't include the formula of all the other stresses and concerns that come with being a colonised child. During that period of my life, I carried a lot of unnecessary shame and self-hatred based on the propaganda of being a Māori, and the neuroscience programs I tried don't account for that, and I couldn't adapt the methods to help me overcome the effects of colonisation, so the core issues remained intact and unmoved. Of course, there is no point in discussing this with the developers of the programs. That idea had occurred to me, however, I discouraged myself from the approach. To clarify, I don't have full access to Western collective power structures on most days of the week because of my race, colour and culture, and therefore it runs that I'd face the same access issues with a general currency for healing. But brains are elastic, no matter the colour, race and culture of a human being. There are more therapists working with individuals living with and dealing with racism. I've not gone to those therapists for that specifics in the present, as I identify and give a voice to the colonised child. I'm not seeking decolonisation again as a specific, but I recognise that decolonisation is ongoing and in every moment I breathe. Health and fitness routines where Māori have been very successful and the byproduct has often meant going into sports and achieving at levels of greatness, and helpful habits still need to be instilled. I enjoyed a lot of fitness. This took me into individual outdoor pursuits. I got into mini triathlons and half marathons. Though the body of this colonised child did not have the best start in life, and that has nothing to do with stereotypes, it was like most of us who had parents working their initiatives off: dietary changes, environmental adjustments. I bet it must have been fun to start with for my parents, leaving the country life for the big city, working out what to do and how, exercising their initiative and grit. But this colonised child's body carried racial grief and trauma, and sports didn't make that go away. Spirituality is not a subject I prefer to discuss in any court at all. I'm not up to date with the most popular secular beliefs that are followed by Māori. The fear I have is homogenisation, of being put into a box and told this is what we are, and what we are in religion is unsustainable for me. What tautoko is there for me? Well, I look at identity rather than habits, rather than therapy, sports, or spirituality. For an example, a habit is bugging us and we need to change it. So we can set about using the method advised to change habits, then employ that method over a period of 21 days to 2 years. I used this method when I was a younger woman and it worked. However, I was in denial at that time of the colonised child. In the last 10 years of coming face to face with health, wealth, and my decaying existence on earth, that denial, to my complete surprise, began to crumble. I had been examining Māori, as said here in this episode, and the voice of the colonised child emerged, saving me from the horrors of stricken poverty and the planet-wide crisis of the pandemic. Yes, the colonised child is an identity and also a way of being real. So when through a series of misgotten illnesses due to dietary choices made when I considered myself to be at equal levels with any of Aotearoa's society, my well-being was being seriously compromised. I had to change, but how? Habits methods was clashing with my reality of the colonised child. What was I to do? I started brainstorming the issues and considerations. I took those results and put them into a role play. To note here, yes, I did develop brainstorming and role play skills in my younger woman days, especially for psychodrama. These I use now as I was struggling with changing eating habits that were a part of my long-standing diet. According to my doctor at the time, I was dangerously close to type 2 diabetes. How? I asked myself, considering I was fit, non-smoker, no alcohol, and in post-grad studies. It had me clueless, and genetics was the only explanation given, which to me was rubbish. But hey, I can be the cynical colonised child as well. The condition, glad for me, never got to that place, though it wrestled its best to get me under that control. Using habit methods, as I said, didn't work this time round. So, with the brainstorming and role-play evolved identity, and though I said earlier I didn't wish to include any talk of spirituality, the conditions I faced, they are in that mistaken spiritual ideal I held up about me all those years. Then, to match the grip of this coming towards me illness, I had to meet that grip and surpass it, but not with willpower or talking myself into anything with chants and affirmations. I excavated the identity. I placed myself first, which gave me tautoko from those years of confusion and pain of discrimination. The byproduct of that delivered me from the looming illnesses into this newfound reality of life on earth in Aotearoa, as well as the inner strength at important times can allow me to be free from the negatives on the path of destruction. Identity for this colonized child places me in a better position to make decisions that are about my true self, the correct place where I make my decisions from. This is not an overnight fix. It takes time to turn this into a realization of the differences that exist for me in our society. At the present day, we are all coming to terms or not with the cost of living and being, whatever that is for you. For the colonized child who is already in the tightest of spheres, it is an opportunity to flip this kaupapa on its head and examine it from, of all places, 1969. I never thought I'd ever want to go back to my childhood, adolescence and teen years. To draw strength and possibilities for my current world view. However, there is gold to be mined in that time. Gold of easier foods and diets, regular bed with the night, up with the day, simple cotton sheets and warm fluffy blankets. Just taking hold of the positives that I remember. And oddly enough, given these were the starting years of my colonisation, it is an irony of sorts for this episode to include. I like the identity of the discerning colonised child consumer, DCCC for short. I like it because it acknowledges and recognises so much of my ignorance of the physical, spiritual, mental, financial, did I forget anything? Horror effects, racism and discrimination in our country of Māori people had on all these beautiful parts of me. It's fine when young youthfulness is on the side of the colonised child, TCC for short, bouncing away or pushing aside all that doth and consume the world, if at the time that's the gig. And at some point accountability comes knocking. The mechanics of assimilation, colonisation, westernisation are working fantastically to make TCC the most powerful consumer of all time in their dreams. There is ultimately no benefit in consumption. It's consumption without benefits. In the long term, it gets harder to consume and harder still if there is debt accumulation with that. Considering in this country the racism towards Māori systemically hidden and well placed behind the boiler in the basement of the Big Finger, which deals with administering and organising Indigenous peoples worldwide. It goes without saying, a major adjustment to being squashed down and confined within the container of the holder of human beings, known as society. And the Big Finger, TBF for short, wills it to take away the will of Indigenous souls, that act eventually killing the colonised child. The identity of the discerning colonised consumer child, DCCC, looks into every aspect of that container, seeks the truth amongst the fledges, and decisions made with tika are their best tool for surviving into thriving on the path of destruction. Identity orders much love of oneself. This is of great value to overcome the senses, the palate and visuals that gets bombarded every nth of a second. It's no wonder difficulties and challenges to find the way through the mere mass of the container crammed full of human beings falls by the wayside, and we simply give in to the homogenizing hypnotism. How the colonized child uses this identity depends on their past, present and future reality. My use of it, I will give you somewhat of it now and waste no more of your valuable time. Adjustments are so streamlined to make, there are virtually no negative effects. Meat and 3 veg sustained me in the 60s and 70s before fusion cooking, and it can now. With adjustments to stress levels and concerns, yes, it can be done. Much of the food I once recently ate contains soy, peanuts, and MSG, substances that aren't helpful to my tinana. I let go of condiments and sauces, mayos, tea, coffee, all the palate-driving foods which lead to health issues for a colonised child. Included in that was the unhealthy diet of bitterness, unresolved grief and issues relating to the experience of violent racial attacks on this colonised child. The byproduct of the identity, DCCC, is the savvy budgeter, clear seen and thinking seeker after health, physical and mental medical care in the tautoko of Papatuanuku, the last being my favourite, turning into an identity. I live an uncomplicated presence on earth, though complicated adds variety and drama for those with energy and might be correct for them. I can't use habit. This won't work for the colonised child. Identity bypasses the mechanics of resistance and eliminates the need for the insatiable, unsustaining palate, watching too much TV, visiting rabbit holes on social media platforms, looking too much at being needy, wanting, and what other experts have called the dopamine effect. The identity I guide of in this episode is not our politics, gender and sexual orientations, colour, race and culture, although you can choose how you wish to use identity for the colonised child crisis. I can't provide any proof that it's worked for those. In my experience, the ultimate releasing of the pressures from the Western collective material path came from learning te reo Māori and accessing the traditional path through connecting with whakapapa and pepeha, and I recognise that for many a colonised child, the connection to whakapapa and pepeha is no longer reachable through our immediate whānau. Yet there are always clues, and identity can be a great guide to point the direction to go in. This would be a reminder your currency for healing is endless. Thank you for joining me on this episode till we meet across the fifth dimension again for the last and final time in this podcast for episode 6. The longing is over. The colonised child's voice continues in resonance. Noho oro mai. Siana Raymond.